First of all, start and echo the comments of my friend, the senator from Tennessee. We'll never fully know what was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. But I do believe that under the leadership of the senator from Alaska, when 16 of us came to the floor yesterday and made the comments, senators on the Republican side saying, please, let's reopen the government. Senators on the Democratic side, like myself, saying, I'm open to increasing the dollar amount on border security. So today, echoing again now the presiding officer's comments, I rise to welcome the news that sanity has prevailed, at least temporarily. After 35 painful days, we're finally poised to reopen the government and pay our hardworking federal employees. And it's not a moment too soon, because under normal circumstances, today was supposed to be a federal payday. But this morning, thousands of federal employees went to work one more day, knowing full well that they would not be getting their paychecks that they had earned. Thousands more have been furloughed, waiting for the president and my colleagues to come to their senses to let us reopen the government. For the last 35 days, 800,000 federal workers have been held hostage through no fault of their own. And frankly, that's just scratching the surface of this destructive shutdown. That number of 800,000 doesn't include the hundreds of thousands of federal contractors not getting paid. And I know I've talked to my friend, the senator from Alaska, and I'd appeal to the common sense and good sense of the presiding officer. We have some legislation, it may not be perfect, but would look at trying to make at least partially whole those low-paid federal contractors, folks under $50,000, who, if we don't find a way to take care of them, will come out of this more than 1 month of their annual salary with nothing at all to show for. We also know, and the senator from Alaska raised this issue with me, even if we were to move towards low-price contractors, low-salary contractors, that the solution that we announced today, and hopefully we signed later today, really will do nothing to take care of the small businesses whose customers were furloughed or working without pay. Think about the senator from Alaska who had that powerful picture here on the floor of the brewery in Kodiak, Alaska. I copied her efforts and went to Port City Brewery in Alexandria, I believe it was yesterday, where not only were they down dramatically in terms of customers, but they had 5 new brews that they were trying to bring to market, none of those able to be approved. The truth is, the damage to those folks in the private sector is done, and I'm not sure there's much we can do to rectify. Candidly, there's no way we can undo the harm. Thinking about here locally, to the food truck owners, some who've had their food trucks repossessed, who sit outside the Smithsonian waiting for the tourists to come. Those losses are permanent. Or in my state, or in the presiding officer states, those restaurants or campgrounds that are outside the Great Smoky Mountains or outside the Shenandoah Valley. Matter of fact, there's no way as well that we're going to be able to make whole the contractor that told me he was closing his doors and laying off 72 workers because he just couldn't meet the payroll during the shutdown. Frankly, it's too late for the president or any of us to help those folks. The only thing we can do now is to end the shutdown, get the federal workers and contractors back to work, and try our darndest to make sure that this would never happen again. We also need to make sure that those folks get back pay. And again, I would especially urge that we take a hard look at making sure that those low-wage contractors who are suffering so badly right now get an opportunity to get their back pay as well. I'm co-sponsoring legislation sponsored by the senator from Minnesota, and I hope all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would look at that legislation. We now finally have the opportunity, by reopening the government temporarily, to take a time out and give both parties the space to negotiate a compromise. We're clearly not there yet, but there is room for common ground. Over the weekend, the President proposed additional funding for screening vehicles and cargo coming across the border at points of entry. The DEA says this is how the majority of illegal drugs come into our country. It's something we can work on together. And if the White House wants to seriously discuss providing real long-term security for Dreamers and TPS recipients, let's have that conversation as well. I think we can do it, but it will take time. In the meantime, let's make sure the President signs today that legislation that will allow our federal employees and contractors to get back to work. Before I close, I want to take a moment for self-reflection at what's happened over the last 35 days. Because in many ways, we're right back where we were in December. Right back where we were, where this body nearly unanimously passed legislation that would have prevented this stupid crisis. For 35 days, this body has refused to fill its role as a part and co-equal branch of government. We can't let that happen again. I hope the White House will take some lessons from this crisis as well. They can start by realizing that no one wins a shutdown. If you shut down the government, the only thing we know for a fact is that the American people lose. I hope the President will also realize that you need to empower those around you to help make a deal. The Vice President came to the Senate with a deal in mid-December. I don't think he left Capitol Hill before the President basically took back the Vice President's deal. Senator Graham proposed almost exactly this deal that we came to 3 weeks ago. But unfortunately, again, the President cut off his good friend at that point. It's my hope that in coming weeks, we can have good faith negotiation where both sides have an opportunity to come out ahead. Imagine that, a win-win proposition here coming out of the halls of Congress. But to do that, we have to have enough of the stunts and the political tit for tat that we've seen over the past few weeks. And in a moment of optimism, if there's anything good that can come from this shutdown, let's make it the last time that a president or a Congress uses shutting down the government as a negotiating tactic. I've got legislation, and it took some hard work to come up with the acronym, but the legislation is called the Stop Stupidity Act. That will make sure that Congress and the White House are the only ones who suffer when the Congress and the White House can't come to a funding agreement. Now, maybe the particulars of that legislation can change, or maybe even responsible members like the presiding officer would think we don't need to put into law something called Stop the Stupidity Act. So I'm open to changing the name as well. But the final language in any deal that comes out 3 weeks from now should put strong provisions and strong penalties in place to prevent this tactic from being used by either party or any White House or Congress in the future. And in my mind, Perhaps the best and easiest way to do that would be, and I know there's Republican legislation on this, that would continue to fund the government. And my idea would say the only place that would actually be the victims of a shutdown going forward would be the Congress and our staff and the White House and its staff. Because more than a little bit of common sense tells me that we wouldn't be here 35 days into this shutdown if all our staffs were experiencing the same kind of shortfall and economic distress that 800,000 of our fellow federal workers experienced. Truth is, our federal workers need to get that paycheck. The truth is, our country can't afford another self-inflicted disaster. So let's go ahead and get that CR passed. Let's go ahead and sit down and negotiate in good faith on border security. And most importantly, let's make sure we're never back in this circumstance again. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.